Welcome to Commander Central, episode 2 of 47, and today we're going to be bringing some sub-$5 replacements to the table, like a delicious dish to pass around. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
Hey, gentlemen, how's it going today?
It's Thursday, which is weird. We typically don't record on a Thursday.
We don't, but it's kind of spring here, which feels nice.
Don't jinx us. Don't jinx us.
Yeah, didn't Puxatawny Phil say it was going to be 6 more weeks of winter? So technically we still have like 3 weeks of winter yet or something like that.
So I had to shovel water yesterday, if that tells you anything.
Yep, I do that all the time at my house too. Because my driveway sits like flat. Whereas like
Exactly.
all my neighbors' driveways have this nice little decline to it, so it runs out to the road. No, mine's flat, so I have to shovel that stupid water.
That's exactly what I did. I got the snow shovel out, and it didn't take me like 10 minutes. It wasn't that long, but I'm like, I have just this lake built up, and I just, it just turned, like it gets cold enough at night, it turns like a skating rink. So I'm just like, I'm just going to get that off somewhere where it drains. So I spent 10 minutes shoveling water like a weirdo.
Our apartment complex guys came at like 3 a.m. this week. I think because of the warm weather was coming, so they came through and just cleared out the end of the driveway and the walk up to the doors because they hadn't been doing those. And I think either someone complained or the landlord drove by and realized that they're doing a crappy job. But I got to wake up at 3 a.m. to a person shoveling a sidewalk, and it's right under my bedroom window. And I'm like, that's what I want to hear at 3 a.m. is the grate of a metal shovel hitting concrete.
You know, that's when you open up your window and you shoot them with those Nerf guns that you and your roommate have and be like, get out of here, shoot!
Okay, I love the idea, I love where you're going, but that would have required A, getting out of my warm bed, B, putting pants on, but that's not anything new here, and C, finding the Nerf guns and ammo. And by that point, I would have been up and I would have been a cranky dude for the rest of the day.
Yeah, I can see that.
Here's my morning adventure. So I bought a new sofa like in October, and it finally came in 6 months later here.
I was going to say, did you just say October and now you're getting it?
Yes. That furniture is very delayed, and it took like 6 months literally.
Okay.
So after this long delay, I went into, they called and told me it was actually going to be here. So I wound up going in, and they offered me like 10% off because it took so long. But I had to go into the furniture store and sign something. So I went and did that.
Yep.
And while I was there, I was asking with the delivery, and like, well, we'll just, leave it, we don't have into-house delivery, but we'll just leave it in your driveway or something. I was like, well, it's winter, and you can't just leave the sofa. Like, I need, like, you've taken 6 months to get this to me. If you can at least get it in the front door. And the sounds like, that's fine. We can do that. We'll sign something. So he put it on the receipt thing, we'll deliver inside the front door. So I get the call this morning, or a text this morning, it'll be delivered in the next hour. So I'm like, okay. So I unlocked the front door and just, assumed they would ring the bell or something. And after the hour passed, I went downstairs, and the sofa is standing up on one end, mind you, on the sidewalk in front of my house.
What?
In a box or anything, or just a random sofa?
No, it was wrapped in plastic, and it was early enough in the morning, this was like 10, so it hadn't got warm enough for things that started melting yet, and that portion of the sidewalk had dried. Like, as soon as the sun comes over the house and hits it, it'll all melt and get wet again, but like, it had dried enough that it was not a wet sidewalk at least. But like, at that point, we're on a clock, because as soon as the sun starts hitting that snow, it's all going to melt again and go back on the sidewalk onto my sofa that's balanced up on end there. And it's just me and my wife, even, who could have helped me. It's parent-teacher conferences today, so she's not going to get home till 9 o'clock tonight. And yes, I could have called somebody and got one of my friends or somebody at work to come and give me a hand, but I had specifically got them to say they would at least deliver it inside the house, again, after waiting 6 months. So I called the furniture place, and the first person I talked to was like, well, sorry, we were busy. I guess that's what they did. It's like, not at all interested in helping. So I had to go all Karen and ask to speak to her manager about it. which feels bad, but like, come on, it's like balanced upright on my sidewalk. So the manager got in, he was much more, he was like, we're really sorry, we will give you, and they knocked $100 off the cost. He's like, we'll send 2 guys from the warehouse down, they can bring it in. We can see right here where it's written on your receipt that it was supposed to be in the house. So they sent 2 guys down here like 10 minutes later, and they hauled it in the house. And then I gave them $50 because I'm like, well, it's not their fault.
No, it's not their fault at all.
Right. So I gave them $50, and they're like, hey, thanks. We're going out for beers tonight anyway. So I'm like, great. Well, there you go. I just paid for your beers. I'm fine.
You paid for a lot of beers.
So anyway, Yeah, so anyway, that was my morning, was me dealing with the sofa that was just left balanced on one end.
I'm sure you handled that much more graciously than I would have. I would not have quite been as nice.
I have so many questions. Like, first off, what furniture store doesn't do in-home delivery? Like,
well, it's because of COVID. It's because of COVID.
Yeah, I'm guessing. Yeah, probably
but
because of
I mean, my roommate delivers appliances, and they just have to wear masks. And then
they don't just leave that refrigerator on the sidewalk in front of someone's house.
You know, your stacked washer and dryer doesn't sit on a pallet in your driveway. I mean, like, I get the COVID thing, but there's enough precautions unless you as the customer say, no, don't bring it in my house. I'm baffled because, like, I've seen my neighbor get deliveries of furniture. I think they had the same thing you did. They were delayed, and then they finally showed up, you know, at the end of January, early February, and watched the guys haul it in, watched the guys haul it out. It's just, I'm so baffled.
I mean, you hear about all these porch pirates and stuff, you know, that come running by and steal people's stuff. You leave a couch sitting out there and they come by like brand new wrapped up. They're like, oh, now that's bank. Let's go throw it in the back of the truck.
And then, so we got it in the house. They put it in the house for me, you know, thanks a lot. And I flipped it up on end and screwed the legs into it. And then I'm like, well, you know, I have floors. It's not carpeted. It's hardwood in there. So I'm like, I should put those like soft pads in the bottom of those legs, which I didn't have. But there's a hardware store not far from me, or at least there used to be. And I wasn't even paying attention. I jumped in I have the car today, so I drove up there and just like stepped foot in the front door to just grab a few of those little furniture pads. And apparently at some point in the last 6 months, it had gone from being a hardware store to like a deli.
Oh, are you talking about that, the Ace or whatever it was?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I stepped in the front door and I'm like,
did you get a sandwich?
And then I'm like, well, I needed some bacon and some burger anyway, so I wound up buying. I did. So I wound up buying a pound of bacon and a pound of hamburgers. So I'm like, well, I'm here. I might as well.
I hear their meat is very good though. Like my dad shopped from them. He's like, it's pretty good. It's almost better than Rumps over in Altoona. I'm like, okay, well, good to know.
Well, there we go. So that's much closer than the butcher shop I usually go to. So they have a new place. So that's kind of what I figured. I'm like, well, I'm here. I might as well grab a few things I need.
And this all happened today?
This was all this morning. This was my morning.
I also would like to say thank you for saying that you could have called a friend, as I'm frantically looking through my text messages and my Slack saying, like, did I miss a message from Dana saying, come help me move a couch?
I did not. And you're far enough away from me, Max. I have another guy who's much closer who could have been here in a couple minutes. I probably wouldn't have called you anyway, but thank you for at least kind of volunteering had I would have needed your help. So.
Wow. Your morning was really exciting. Mine consisted of, you know, shredded wheat in the morning to eat and, you know, all old person stuff.
This is very much an old school Commander Central show where we babble about nothing for 20 minutes before we actually get to a show topic. This is a throwback Commander Central. So anyway, after all of that, how's everyone doing? Did anyone play any fun games this week? How about you, Max?
Did we play on Saturday? Or I feel like that was a long time ago.
Man, I've lost track. We played... I don't think so.
Max, you played on... You asked me Saturday if I was free to come play.
We did play on Saturday, yeah.
That's right, we did, yeah. Like a kind of a spontaneous thing. You'd message me like, hey, you want to play a game?
Right, and I'm like, okay, I'll find a fourth. And I asked Chris, and he's like, oh, I'm at the shop. I'm like, okay, we'll find someone else.
That's right.
So yeah, I guess we played on Saturday, Dana, and I remember because I kept a really bad opening hand with Sai, and then almost pulled the game out after 10 turns.
Well, that's right. So what happened, because I played my Adriana deck, and I had out Divine Visitation, and then I cast was it Firecat Blitz, or was it one of those spells that makes like 1/1 elementals and X
yeah.
I think it was Divine, and made a bunch of angels. So I was sitting there on, I think, 18 angels.
You cast that white one that you are all high on right now. The one with Strive.
Oh, yeah, Call the Copper Codes. Yeah, Call the Copper Codes. So I made a ton of angels. And then I was basically, at that point, like, the number one target. But I wound up killing Max, and I wound up killing the second player. And the last player was Angelo Guerrera, who writes for EDH Rec, who was at 1 life. And I couldn't kill him. He came back and won.
He pulled a Dana Roach.
Yeah. Because he was playing like an Enchantress deck, and he had a Sphere of Safety where you can't attack unless you pay a mana for each enchantment a person controls.
Yeah, and he was playing Carador, so he had the walk along with it, so even if you destroyed it, he could bring it back.
Yep. Yeah, then he had it protected with like a Sterling Grove, and so like basically I would have, the only way I could have done it was like an enchantment sweeper that let me attack immediately, and I just like there's one austere command in the deck, and the odds of me drawing it in the next 3 or 4 turns before he beat me, we just wound up, rather than like taking another 20 minutes, we just scooped it up. But yeah, that was a nice comeback on his part. So congrats, Angelo. How was the shop this week, Chris? You said you went down there.
It wasn't bad. I didn't get to play on Tuesday. I went down there. I think there's like 12 people in there or something. I ended up just helping behind the counter because they have all the Pokemon's crazy right now.
Oh yeah,
wow, it's way too many people, way too fast, and you don't know what's going on. So I was helping them out. Other than that, I played Modern on Monday and went 2-1 with that. Didn't really care. Nice. It was more of I want to play a game of Magic, so I came in there.
You bet. Cool. Well, we had a little bit of news today, Max. Want to start us off here with this Universes Beyond thing?
Yeah, so Universes Beyond was announced today. This will be a series that combines the gameplay of Magic the Gathering with other third-party properties, starting with Warhammer 40,000 and Lord of the Rings. Other sets will join the Universe Beyond as it expands throughout the year and going forward. These products will have slightly different branding, similar to how the Secret Lair Walking Dead set did. And they will be generally available and not restricted to just Secret Lair products, which is great. So your LGS, your big box store, your online preferred shopping methods should all have these products.
Interesting. This will not be standard legal. I am also assuming it will not be modern legal. My other guess would be it's probably going to be legacy legal, as they usually do with like commander type stuff, although it might not be because so we talked about The Walking Dead. And yeah. I do believe that some of those cards were legacy legal.
I think so, yeah.
Yep. So the Secret Lair, like The Walking Dead cards, will be grandfathered into the Universes Beyond. And some of this will be entirely standalone cards, like The Walking Dead. And some will be reskinned, like the Godzilla cards from Ikoria. Another note for everyone is Forgotten Realms are not currently canonically, whatever. They're not canon of the multiverse. But right. That may change in the future.
So one of the things we had speculated on was they would make Forgotten Realms set part of like the greater Magic universe, so Jace could go there, and they're saying that's not for now the plan, but that may well change down the road.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a bunch of legal stuff within that.
Yeah,
I thought that was... Yeah. Maybe I read that wrong. Continue.
Well, because one of the things with this announcement, too, is I believe Wizards of the Coast is splitting away from Hasbro and are going to again be a standalone company.
They are their own division, yes. So they're still owned by Hasbro. They're going to be Wizards and Digital Gaming or something like that.
Okay.
I was going to say, if you watch the stock market at all, Hasbro stocks have been slowly declining for the past 3 years. So
yeah, well, WotC has been one of their main income sources for sure. So that's very interesting there. And they also mentioned that one of these will be essentially a full expansion size, so 300 plus cards, but they won't all be that. So maybe one of them will be the equivalent of a From the Vault or something where hey, there's 15 Lord of the Rings cards or something, and one of them will be a full on 300 card set. So that's interesting. I don't really, it's nothing really new, I guess, because we had The Walking Dead. If you go way back, Portal 3 Kingdom is something that's taken from an existing set of stories. Same thing with Arabian Nights. So, I don't love this necessarily personally. For me, I don't know if I want to see someone playing some giant robot thing from Warhammer, but just because I don't like it doesn't mean it's not there's a lot of people that do want to do that. So whatever. It's not my thing, but good for the people that are Lord of the Rings fans that want to build a full Lord of the Rings deck, I guess.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, I guess. That's the only word I can really give it.
Yeah.
I don't know. It seems like they're trying to pump too much product into 1 year, and it's actually just, I don't know if they're actually going to make money off all this stuff, but maybe they will.
It's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff, and it's definitely kind of exhausting. So it's one of those things they are doing it, so you can either kind of shrug and accept it and get on the train, or you can be mad, and that's not going to make a difference either. So I'm not going to quit playing Magic because I don't like a thing, and I don't even not like it. I just don't. I don't like it, but I'm not mad about it. So whatever. I'm just gonna go along with it, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. So I am actually the reverse of both of you, I think. So Originally with the Secret Lair crossing with The Walking Dead, that was our first example of mechanically unique cards being printed outside of a standard set, a commander set, a modern set, whatever. And when that got released, I was not a fan of that. Sure. But knowing that these aren't going to be standard legal, and I'm guessing we're not going to get we'll get some smaller stuff. So I think the Warhammer stuff is actually commander decks. That's how they're doing that one.
Okay.
That's what I saw on Twitter before recording. I don't know the exact article, but everybody, all the big names are saying Warhammer commander decks. So that's cool.
Okay.
The Lord of the Rings set will be a complete set. That's kind of cool as well. I'm looking at this more of a, if this is how they're going to introduce mechanically unique things, I don't see that any different than we introduced Eminence, with Oloro and then officially keyworded it years later. And as someone who doesn't play Standard or Modern or anything like that, I think this opens up the realm of, hey, if you want to crack product, you want to crack booster packs, go buy that Lord of the Rings booster box, knowing that you're the Commander player and you just want them for Commander, versus go buy that box of Kaldheim, knowing that the one card that's gonna might make any money back on that entire set you might not open.
Right.
And go, if you need singles from that standard set, support your LGS. Go buy singles from them. Heck, buy your sealed product from your LGS as well. But, now you can kind of have a reason to say, cool, I want to buy the sealed product of this Universes Beyond product. And I'll still buy some singles from Kaldheim or Strixhaven or Forgotten Realms. I think it just, yes, I agree, it sounds like product overload, but I think it's in a good way, because it isn't saying you have to buy this standard set, you have to buy this secret lair. It's cool, I want to run Frodo as my commander, I'm going to go buy some Lord of the Rings packs.
Well, and that's a good point, that like people getting excited about this thing, because like the more people that didn't currently play Magic that now might start playing Magic because of these cards and then go to the LGS and buy stuff, that's good for the game and it's good for your local shop owners. So, I mean, if we get, half a dozen new people playing on Commander Night because I wanted to play a Warhammer deck, that's great. And the other thing, if you think about it really, like even if you don't like seeing other intellectual properties in the cards that you're playing against, in the average 300 card expansion, how many cards wind up coming out and going into your Commander deck? A couple at best. Occasionally occasionally you'll be like, it's a landfall set and you have a landfall deck, and so you have like 6 new cards. But for the most part, at most, it's a couple. So once in a while, a couple of these cards will show up in someone's deck, and you won't see them because they won't draw them anyway. And if they do, how often have we played against that one deck where someone has their commander altered to be Darth Vader anyway? Like, that happens already as it is. So, it's not that big of a deal, I think. Even if you don't like it, I think we'll all be just fine.
Okay, I'm going to keep my eyes out for the Baby Yoda card, because that card's going to be worth a lot of money, and I'm going to snatch one up right away.
Grogu. Spoilers.
He's still forever Baby Yoda.
I know, I do too.
Well, if you out there in listener land want to reach out to us and say hello or talk about shoveling water from your driveway or tell us your thoughts about this brand new Universes Beyond series, how would you go about doing that, Chris?
You can find us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can search us up on Facebook, CMDR Central. You can find us online at cmdrcentral.com, and you can also find us on YouTube by searching CMDR Central.
You can also head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central and check out our reward tiers, such as the Decks You Play series, guesting on the show, or just joining our community to play some virtual EDH and chat about the Universes Beyond sets that will be coming out in the future.
People were really talking about it pretty heavily this morning, for sure, already.
They still
I saw
are.
our Slack blowing up, so I was just like, okay, these aren't any of my channels I need to look at, so we're just going to let them go.
Whenever you say something like that, Chris, I always think of the meme where it's like Homer Simpson slowly backing into the bush to get out of the scenario.
Right, yeah. Too much activity. So, okay, let's jump into the main topic here. We're talking about like sub $5 cards. I think most of mine I even picked were sub $1 because we've talked about prices in the past going crazy. They've really gone crazy in the last 6 months. Reserve list stuff in particular, but like a lot of non-reserve list stuff has gotten really pricey. I just noticed Extra Planar Lens is over $50 now. Sapphire Medallion, which was just in that Teferi EDH deck, 5 years ago or so, is over $50 right now. Like,
yep.
Even cards that are reprintable, a bunch of them have gotten crazy. And even ignoring stuff that's $50, there's a lot of like $1 cards. Mystic Remora was 50 cents for the longest time, and it's now $8.
That's your fault.
Even cheap
so
stuff.
I don't even want to hear about it. It's all your fault.
Absolutely. Not wrong. But like, how many years did we say, hey, put a Mystic Remora in this deck, it's only $1?
Yep.
That's not something you can say anymore. So we each came up with 5 cards we think should see a little bit more play, especially in the light of the fact that these could probably be replacements for things that are very expensive, and these are all cards that remain relatively inexpensive. So we're going to kind of rotate Max to Chris to me. So Max, why don't you start us off here with your first card?
My first card, I'm kicking it off with a land, and that is Detection Tower. This was printed in Magic 19. It's in 6,800 decks on EDHREC, and it says it can tap for a colorless, or you can pay 1 and tap it, and until end of turn, your opponents and creatures your opponents control with hexproof can be the target of spells and abilities you control as though they didn't have hexproof. I picked this card because the similar replacement is Arcane Lighthouse, and that's almost $4. Not super expensive, but it's still $4. And if you're building on a budget, that $4 is a lot of 50-cent cards. That's 8 of them.
When we just did that budget thing with Scrap Trawlers, Max, with a $50 budget, I couldn't have afforded to put $3 lands in that deck.
No.
For sure.
Another good replacement for this would be Glaring Spotlight, but that's an artifact, so it's easier to remove.
Yeah.
And what I like about Detection Tower is it hits the player too. So if people run Shalai, like this is what made me think about this card is I run Shalai. I'm going to get a Shalai in the new Secret Lair Blackest Magic. So this just shuts down Shalai. It helps get that burn damage through, that chip damage, whatever you want. So I think it's a really cool card and it's super cheap. It's under $1.
That's a good call. I like it for sure. I'm running it in one deck currently, and for the exact reason you mentioned, Max, I only had one Arcane Lighthouse, which is in another deck, and I went to, and I'm like, out of Detection Tower is close enough, and to not spend $4 on Arcane Lighthouse. And I had a Detection Tower, and I was like, Detection Tower. So that's why I put it in the deck, absolutely. Good card.
I will note before I move on, I tried to pick a card of each type. So that's kind of how I did my 5.
And Chris did it a little bit differently too. Chris, what did you end up doing here?
Well, since I consistently, every show, tell all of you wonderful, beautiful listeners out there that this color is the greatest color in Magic. Forget
Green.
all the other ones.
Green.
And we're going to talk about red. I chose all red cards.
Green.
Chris the Red.
So the first card I want to talk about, and this is a card that I've talked about quite a bit actually throughout the years of our show. People might remember it. This is called War Cadence. It is a 3-mana enchantment that you can pay X and a red. This turn, creatures can't block unless their controller pays X for each blocking creature he or she controls. Now, I took a whole bunch of stats off EDHREC for all the cards that I chose, and since I'm doing just one color, EDHREC separates the decks into like what it could be into, and for the color of red, it's 228,000 decks on EDHREC. So this card, there's only 1,000 of them in decks out of 228,000. This is a 50-cent card. Now, while there isn't quite like a direct replacement for this, since I'm talking about red needs any help it can get. Now, unless you're playing like giants or dragons or something, as the game progresses, your creatures actually start losing that power race. Because, as Max was talking about green creatures get huge. Blue flyers are huge when they start coming out. All that kind of stuff, you start losing that little bit of a power race. So you need something that can help you win the game in the end. And this card just does it for you. And I'm surprised it is hardly played at all.
I mean, it's better than Trample in a lot of situations.
It is.
Trample, they can, if they just have 1/1s or something, you can trample over for 8 damage and it's free, I guess. But like in this case, if they have any kind of blockers at all, you're just making your stuff unblockable for the most part.
Yeah, or you're forcing them to tax them out. So they can't, like if you're playing against a player who's playing stuff at instant speed, you force them to tax out their mana to block so they don't die and then they can't do any other shenanigans.
You bet. Yeah. This is one of those cards that like I don't have a deck for, but I remember the first time I saw it because it was in one of the pre-cons, 2015, I want to say.
One of the early ones,
yeah. And seeing it, I'm like, wow, how is this not played more often? So yeah, really, really solid card. That's a good pick.
Yep.
My first one here on the list is going to be Chain Reaction. It is essentially Red's version of Damnation or Wrath of God because it's the same cost, 2 red, so kind of mirrors those two in black and white. Blasphemous Act has been printed 8 times. It was $10 for the last printing. It's down to 3, but like it's going to go back up again because it's an amazing card. And again, we talked about Max and I built those $50 budget decks. We probably couldn't have afforded to put a $3 Blasphemous Act in there. And that's right now. That's before it gets to 5 or 7 or whatever. Chandra's Ignition is already over $5, and that's going to keep going up because it's only had the 1 printing. Chain Reaction, though, is under $1 right now. And it's only in 10,000 decks versus 50,000 for Blasphemous Act.
Yeah.
All it says is it deals X damage to each creature or X number of creatures on the battlefield. So there's going to be times when you wish, there's 4 creatures out and you still want to wipe the board. It's going to do 4 damage each, which isn't enough. But Blasphemous Act is going to not kill stuff sometimes too. I've had that happen. Usually when you want to cast a board wipe, it's because there's like 6 or 8 or 10 creatures in play, and most of the time Chain Reaction is just a board wipe. It's just going to kill everything. If there's enough stuff in play to make you want to cast a board wipe, there's enough stuff in play usually for Chain Reaction to kill all of it anyway. And there's extra synergy if you're running something like Repercussion or something where damage dealt to creatures is dealt to the controller. That's just a bonus, so it has some extra play in decks doing that as well.
Or any damage dealt that's doubled, which red is quite a few cards for.
In red especially, yeah. So I wasn't intentionally doing all red cards like Chris did, but I actually wound up picking 2. The last one I do was also red. But yeah, it's a really good card. It's a really good budget board wipe. If you don't have the money or don't own a Blasphemous Act or Chain Reaction, it's a real solid pick.
Yep.
Max, what's your number 2?
My next one is an artifact in Angel's Trumpet. This is a 3-mana artifact that says attacking does not cause creatures to tap. So this is essentially a world artifact. It affects everybody. At the end of each player's turn, tap all untapped creatures he or she controls that did not attack this turn, and Angel's Trumpet deals 1 damage to that player for each creature tapped this way. It's in 806 decks on EDHREC, primarily in group hug decks or aggro decks, and it's clocking in at 91 cents according to Scryfall. I like forcing combat in EDH. This is making your opponents decide, hey, do I really want to attack with all my Mana Dorks or my Seedborn Muse, knowing that, cool, they're not going to tap, but if I don't, they're going to hurt me, even though they might untap next turn in the case of, like, Seedborn Muse. I think it's a cool kind of political thing, and to be quite honest, I don't think I would ever try to remove this off of my opponent's board, so it's going to do you a lot of work, and probably isn't going to get taken care of, so it'll just kind of help out everybody. Hopefully if you pair this up with something like, I don't know, War Cadence.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I actually ran this in my Varchild Betrayer of Keldor deck when I had it, just because you wanted to force people to attack with those tokens you gave them, and they can't attack you. So it was a very useful card there as well. And yeah, very neat one from Urza's too. It's an oldie. It's a good pick, Max. Chris, what's your number 2 here?
So you two have discussed, replacing other cards. So I found one that would be a direct replacement for another card in red, and that card that I want to replace is Vandal Blast. Now, Vandal Blast, as everyone knows, you can destroy 1 artifact, or you can overload it to destroy all artifacts aside from the ones that you control. Now, Vandal Blast is a $6 card. So this card is called Meltdown. It is in 611 decks, and it is a 50-cent card. Now, for X and a red, you can destroy each artifact with total casting cost X or less. Now, the way I look at this is it can straight up replace Vandal Blast. While yes, it's destroying your own, that's fine. Due to the simple fact that red recurs artifacts. They are known for recurring artifacts. It's what they do. Artifact shenanigans galore. This can also work better than Vandal Blast. So we look at it, how many are there? There's 1, 2, 3... There's probably like 30 2-mana Mana Rocks floating around out there. So for 3 mana, you destroy all 2-mana Mana Rocks and just wipe the board of everything.
Yeah.
I mean, overall value for this card, I believe, is phenomenal, and I'm surprised that it does not see play anywhere.
That's really, really good. I've never even seen this card before. That is really good.
Yeah. I mean, my guess is, I love your example, Chris. You could destroy all those 2-mana rocks, even the 3-mana rocks. I think it probably comes down to the fact that people don't like blowing up their own stuff, even in the dire of circumstances.
True.
And if you really want to destroy that 6-mana artifact, you're looking at more mana than Vandal Blast. But I agree with Dana. This is an awesome card, and I've never seen it. And dang, Urza Saga stuff has a lot of cool cards.
Yeah.
I actually, what I did for the show is I went into my playable box of red, because as I said, red's my favorite color, and I started pulling out cards that I've never played but I thought could be playable, and I'm like, let's talk about this one and this one and this one. Let's check the prices on these cards.
Well, in where I was thinking of this one is like in some kind of a red-green deck, particularly maybe one that does landfall stuff, because you tend to get your ramp in those decks away from like your Secure Elder kind of cards or your Farseeks, just because you want to get lands out to do land stuff, and you're not probably running signets or talismans, things of that nature. So in that kind of deck, I think it's probably really good because, yeah, like you said, spend our red and 2 colorless on it and blow up everyone's Soul Ring, all those talisman signets that you probably don't have.
Yeah, and the way I look at it, if you do end up spending the 5 mana that, Blasphemous or Vandal Blast, would be playing to destroy all artifacts, that's every 4-mana Mana Rock, and you don't see a whole lot of them, that are above the 4-mana mark. So you're destroying everyone's mana ramp, whereas you may leave other wacky artifacts out there, but as long as you're slowing down the table, but you're still gaining value, why not?
Exactly. That's a good pick. All right. My number 2 here is a mana rock, speaking of. It's Prismatic Lens. It's an artifact for 2, and you can tap for colorless, or you can spend 1 and add a mana of any color. So the most important part here, for the most part, is you can just tap it for a colorless mana, and it's a 2 mana rock that doesn't come into play tapped.
Yep.
For the list of 2 mana rocks that don't come into play tapped, there's the 10 Signets and 10 Talismans, obviously. We talked about the Medallion cycle that aren't really mana rocks, but they're kind of ones because they let your colored spells cost a colorless less.
Yep.
But they're super expensive right now. You have Arcane Signet, you have Everflowing Chalice, Felwar Stone, which is almost $5 now.
Wow.
Fractured Power Stone, of all goofy things from Plane Chase, is a couple bucks. Mind Stone and Thought Vessel are both like 3 or 4. And Grim Monolith is like 250.
I love how you saved that one for last.
Right, yeah. So like of the 2 mana rocks, if you're playing in a 3-color deck or something, yeah, you can run 3 Signets and 3 Talismans. But if you're playing in a 2-color deck, you can get 1 Signet, 1 Talisman, maybe a Medallion if your mana base affords it. Arcane Signet, you probably can't afford a Grim Monolith. So like there's a limited amount of mana rocks that are in the 2 mana slot you can run in that kind of deck. And Prismatic Lens is still under $1. And it also fixes your colors if you absolutely need to. But worst case, it just comes into play and you can immediately use it. Of all the 2 mana rocks, it's the only one under $1. So I think that's at least worth considering if you were on a budget. 50 cents for a 2 mana rock is a pretty good deal when it doesn't come into play tapped.
Yeah, as you're talking about, I actually think I'm going to go pick some of those up just for the simple fact of, I like playing more competitive EDH decks too. So, I mean, being able to slap in all these mana rocks I can is pretty good.
Yeah. All right, Max, let's run it back to you. What's your number 3?
My number 3, we're going to move into the sorceries. Or nope, we're going to start with instants.
Okay.
And this is a card I've actually talked about in the past on this show, and it's Costly Plunder. It's 1 in a black. And an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice an artifact or a creature, and you draw 2 cards. This is in just over 4,500 decks on EDH Rec, and it clocks in at 18 cents, according to Scryfall. We just got Village Rites last summer in the core set. 1 black, sack a dude, draw some cards. Love it. But the fact that this lets you sacrifice an artifact instead of a creature, I think is awesome for 2 mana. Someone casts a Vandal Blast, or as Chris is going to cast a Meltdown on me one of these days.
Right.
I can spend 2 mana, sacrifice that Soul Ring that's already going to get destroyed, and draw some cards. And yet my bodies stick around.
Yep.
I also love using this to where, like, if you need to destroy your Hangerback Walker somehow, feed it to this, make a bunch of choppers, and draw some cards. I think this is just extremely underplayed. I mean, 4,500 decks. And yeah, there are probably more efficient spells, but being able to sacrifice artifacts along with creatures is just really good.
And that instant speed is super nice too.
I like the idea of that card where, there have been times, and I complain about every time people who've played with me know it, I don't have a Soul Ring in my deck, I swear to God. And then I'll draw it one day at like turn 20, and it's like, well, this is stupid. Well, having that card, you play that Soul Ring, it's like, okay, 1 mana. Well, now I'm just going to sack it for 2 mana to draw 2 cards. Because you don't need a Soul Ring late in the game, so.
Yeah, and at that point, and you can tap the Soul Ring first to float 2 mana.
Yeah.
So at that point, you're essentially paying 1 mana to draw 2 cards. That feels okay at that point in the game.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why Mind Stone is such a popular card, because like when you get to that turn 10 and you're like, I don't need a mana rock, I'm just going to draw a card off Mind Stone or Commander Sphere even. There's a point in the game where you're just trying to like turn a corner, and having that 1 extra mana off mana rock doesn't make that big of a deal. Cost you Plunder, turn it into 2 cards.
Yeah, I agree. And the other upside to that is Black plays a lot of sacrifice shenanigans. You want to sacrifice stuff, so any little outlets you can get, the better.
Yeah, that's a really good card. I like it a lot. I agree. Village Rites is probably slightly better, but like, but in the right deck, the ability to hit artifacts is huge and is worth the extra 1 mana.
Yes.
And we just got a bunch of partners in Commander Legends that deal with artifacts, especially in black.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's definitely decks that would utilize this card.
For sure. I like it a lot. Chris, what's your number 3?
I have an instant as well. This card is in 196 decks on EDH Rec, and it is a 36-cent card. It's called Outmaneuver for X and a red. So X target blocked creatures deal combat damage to defending player instead of to blocking creatures this turn. This kind of falls underneath the War Cadence route. Getting through with blocks, all this stuff, whatever else. Well, they can block all they want. I'm still going to deal the damage to them. The other thing I like about this card is at instant speed, you can sit back watching like two armies fight each other and just be like, oh, you block with everything? Guess what? No, you're still taking all that damage.
Yeah, the ability to use this on your opponents is really, really useful.
Yes, and it's in red, and red doesn't really have these shenanigans like the other colors do. So, I mean, when I saw this card, I'm like, Now, I don't know how actually viable it is to play, because red usually likes to go the aggro route, play something every turn, blah, 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 blah. But I'm sure that there are many decks out there that would like something like this, that they can punch through the damage themselves.
Yeah, no, it's definitely better than being in 196 decks.
Yes.
Especially at 36 cents.
I really see this in like a goblin deck where all your goblins end up probably going to get blocked somehow. Well, you just cast this and make sure the biggest ones punch the opponent.
Yep.
Yeah.
The other thing that had crossed my mind with this, and while it's not quite the right play for it, is if someone attacks you, they do something weird and shenanigans, when you go into blockers, you're just like, okay, well, I'm going to cast a spell. All my creatures are going to survive these blocks. I'll take the damage instead, and now I'm coming after you then the next turn.
Yeah, good pick. All right, I have a white sorcery here, and the biggest problem with this card is Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile exist. And it would be like if every blue draw spell that got printed, you're like, yeah, but Ancestral Recall is legal. It's obviously so much better. Swords to Plowshares and Path are obviously crazy strong, but they're also $3, and for a long time, Path was $10. And like we talked about, $3 is not nothing either. Declaration in Stone is bulk. It's 30 cents. For 1 and a white for a sorcery. The sorcery part is unfortunate, but you exile target creature and all other creatures its controller controls with the same name as that creature. So if someone has, just talking about a token swarm in red, a bunch of goblins, if they have that Krenko out that just made 20 goblin tokens, or we talked about in games we played, me making like 18 angel tokens, you can get rid of all of them for 2 mana with this spell.
Yep.
Now, the downside here is that player investigates for each non-token creature exiled this way, but that's not a downside if you're hitting a bunch of tokens. If you're hitting all the goblin tokens or the angel tokens, those are tokens, so they don't even get the investigation as well. And if they do get a clue token for you hitting that Blightsteel Colossus, you don't care about that at all.
No, I mean, it's no different than you pathing them. They get the land. Or
they get a land, right.
You swords them, they gain the life. I mean, so either way, they're getting an upside. I'd rather have them draw a card than guaranteeing them a land or, 20 life or something stupid.
And drawing a card that costs them 2 mana to use.
Yep.
I mean, obviously, if you are sitting on a pile of Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares from, playing a bunch of different standards in the past or something, or cracking a bunch of boxes of whatever
Commander Legends,
whatever master set. Yeah, right, exactly. Then obviously you're going to run those because they're better. But if you don't have those and don't have the money to spend on a $3 or $4 or more Path to Exile, if it doesn't get a reprint every year or twice a year, Declaration in Stone is a perfectly playable card for the 30 cents it costs, and I definitely think it should see a little bit more play.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even if you're playing mono white, why not play all 3 of them?
Right, at that point, yeah. For sure. All right, Max, we're going back to you.
Okay, now I'll talk about the sorcery on my list.
Okay.
Another card that we've talked about in the past, Calming Verse. This is a sorcery for 3 and a green. Destroy all enchantments you don't control. Then if you control an untapped land, destroy all enchantments you control. This just checks at the resolution of the spell to make sure if a land is untapped. So if you do this in your main phase, just tap out, and then you have extra mana in your pool. Or if you do this in your second main phase, maybe you're playing a lands deck where they're all going to untap with a Seedborn Muse or something. So I just think this is huge. The fact that you can tap out in response, essentially, just so you can keep your enchantments while destroying that Doubling Season and that Mirari's Wake and that Divine Visitation, while keeping your, Frontier Siege and Outpost Siege. It's a lot. It does a lot of work for 4 mana.
Absolutely. Chris mentioned Vandal Blast before. This is green's equivalent of Vandal Blast for enchantments, basically.
Yeah. And I might not have mentioned this. This is in 868 decks, and it's at 75 cents according to Scryfall.
And this is probably one of those cards, and this is probably true of a bunch of the ones Chris mentioned too. Players probably just don't know this exists.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, that's what I'm curious about.
Unless because it hasn't had a reprint, it's probably not sitting in store binders or boxes. So unless someone specifically shows you this card and goes, hey, put this in your deck, I would wager a ton of players just don't know it's a card.
Yeah.
Yeah, really good pick. Chris, what red gem do you have for us next?
I have an enchantment. This enchantment's name is Ashling's Prerogative. For 2 mana, 1 colorless and a red, it reads, as Ashling's Prerogative comes into play, choose odd or even. 0 is considered an even number. Each creature with converted mana cost of the chosen value has haste. So this is a global effect. But it also reads, each creature without the converted mana cost of the chosen value comes into play tapped. Now, while yes, you could run, like Fervor, which is a $3 card, or Hammer of Perforos, which is a $2 card, or Mass Hysteria, which does the same thing as a global enchantment, is an $8 card. I believe the true value of this card is how you build around it. Now, if you build properly with your deck, you're going to gain all the value, while yes, your opponent may randomly, get something that meets the criteria of a creature, but a lot of times they won't, and you're going to be taxing them. As a red mage, you're going to be taxing the other side of the table, which is phenomenal. This is only in 734 decks on EDHREC, and is only a 58-cent card.
Well, especially in a token deck, the 0 is even. So if you're playing like Krenko Mob Boss or something, all the tokens Krenko make will have haste, because 0 is even, and Krenko being 4 mana also will have haste.
Yep.
So, there's going to be some other goblins in a Krenko deck pretty frequently, but like the big deal for the most part is those tokens, and those are going to be 0, and this is pretty easy to play around. But even if you're playing, some other commander that's 3 or something, oftentimes maybe you don't you're not going to block with your commander if it's a token maker or something. You don't care. You just want it in play doing its thing, buffing your creatures, whatever it is, and you'll untap it next turn and swing with it. You weren't going to swing with it anyway this turn. So yeah, this isn't something I think you'd like. Calming Verse, you can probably put in a ton of decks no matter what. I think This is much more specific. But the specific decks where it's good, it's really, really good.
Yeah, and I'm surprised it's hardly played at all. I mean, even if it's not in like the specific deck per se, 2 mana for a haste outlet is huge. Because like Fervor and Hammer Perforos are both 3 mana haste outlets, and Hysteria is a 1 mana, but it's global anyway. So why not get a other sided tax built into it?
And being global, does hurt because they can swing at you with the haste stuff. But there's 3 opponents. It's a 1 in 3 chance you're going to get hit. And if you're playing, like I said, that token deck, you might have more blockers than somebody else too. So in that case, that being global can maybe even help you sometimes, because it's going to make your opponent swing at other people when they can't swing at you.
It sure can.
So, I like it. We'll go back to my number 4 here. My number 4 is blue bounce spell. It's Aetherize, 3 and a blue, and it's instant speed. Return all attacking creatures to their owner's hands. Cyclonic Rift has been printed 5 times, and it's still over $20.
I was gonna say, it's probably like a $100 card right now.
If they hadn't reprinted it, it probably would be, yeah, if they hadn't gotten 5 printings.
I remember buying this card for $2.
I got one in my the Dragon's Maze pre-release, because the Dragon's Maze, you got I think it was 2 Dragon's Maze packs, 2 Gatecrash, and 2 Return to Ravnica.
Yeah.
And I think that was the first pre-release I ever did, and I got one, and I'm like, well, I needed to play something for blue, and I wasn't really paying attention, and it got to turn 7, and I drew it, and I'm like, oh, I have 7 mana. Wait a minute, it doesn't hit me. It bounces all of their stuff that aren't lands? That's insane! And I had just started playing Commander, and I could not believe that every blue Commander deck wasn't running Cyclonic Rift after seeing how well it did in that pre-release.
And now every Commander deck does.
Right, everyone does, right. But yeah, it was nothing. It was $1 or $2 forever, even through, I think, Theros.
Yep.
But it's 20 now. It's been 30. If I hadn't got a few reprints in it, it'll keep going up if they don't reprint it every year. Aetherize is 70 cents. And yes, it doesn't bounce anything but creatures, and it only bounces attacking creatures, but it's still absolutely devastating when somebody thinks they have alpha strike damage on you, and all their stuff goes back to their hand. I guess it's a testament to how crazy Broken Rift is, that Aetherize is still really, really good. But if you can't afford a Rift, I absolutely feel fine running Aetherize in a deck, even alongside Rift sometimes if you have a Rift. But if you don't, it's absolutely worth putting in. And it's in the budget $50 deck I built for that Scrap Trawler stream. So it's a really good card and should see some more play. Max, number 5. What do you have here?
Is this number 5? 1, 2.
It's going to be a Planeswalker, right?
You have 6
Oh,
now.
I have 6. Hey, look at me. I'm an overachiever.
You're a hard worker.
Okay, so my 5th card is an enchantment named Pia's Revolution for 2 and a red. The best, air quote, color in Magic.
I know exactly what card this is, too.
It's in 1,700 decks on EDHREC, and it costs a mere 32 cents. And what this does is, whenever a non-token artifact is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, return that card to your hand unless target opponent has Pia's Revolution deal 3 damage to him or her. I just see this as Athreos for artifacts. And in mono red specifically, you already have your damage doublers, your Torbrands. This is just icing on the cake, and it's going to deal a lot of damage if you build your deck the right way, let alone all the Duretti decks out there, or the new Joyra, that can loop loop historic stuff. This card is just going to be a powerhouse in those type of decks.
I'm surprised that is not over $1. That card is really powerful.
I kind of am too. Yeah, I'm surprised it isn't like even like, those Joyra Eggs decks that are constantly cracking artifacts and doing that kind of thing. I'm surprised it isn't in there, or at least in a lot more of those decks, at least enough to get the numbers higher than they currently are.
Well, even if it's not, I mean, just in a deck in general where you're just doing something with artifact shenanigans, it doesn't have to be broken or anything.
Right.
Yeah, that's really good
solid.
card.
Chris, what's your number 5 red card here?
Okay, so I told everyone I was going to discuss red cards in general, and I'm going to stray away from that for this one.
All right.
All these cards are going to be lumped into one category, and I'm going to call them instant shenanigan cards, is what I'm going to call them. Because there's many of them. There's hundreds of them out there, and they're all, quarter cards, 10-cent cards, all that kind of stuff. And the 2 of them that I have listed here I'll talk about. And the reason I want to talk about this is most of these cards are either 2 CMC, 3 CMC, sometimes 1 CMC, but they have an ability stapled onto it, and then you draw a card, so they replace themselves. So the 2 I'm going to talk about are Grave Consequences and Due Respect. Grave Consequences is a 2-mana instant, 1 colorless and a black, and it says each player may remove any number of cards from his or her graveyard from the game. Then each player loses 1 life for each card in his or her graveyard. Then you draw a card. Now Due Respect reads 1 colorless and a white. Permanents enter the battlefield tapped this turn. Then you draw a card. So this is something I've really thought about a lot because I try to make these cards into my deck, but anything that has a really good ability stapled to it that you can do at instant speed but then can replace itself, I would love to see more of these cards played. All that fun stuff, because these are like the fun cards that are, draft chaff that people just throw away anyways. If we could get them into the game more, I think people would be a lot more happy with what they do, because everyone, when they build, what's the first thing they do? Staples. So half of my deck is staples, and then you never actually look at these hidden gems like cards like this.
Due Respect is really good. That hits lands too. That's brutal.
Yes. And Grave Consequences is a Bajuka Bog pretty much on a card that you replace itself. Or they take damage. So, I mean, why not do it that route too?
Yeah, no, those are both really solid. I like those picks.
Yeah, there are a lot of them like this. So, I mean, if you guys ever think about it, take a deep dive one day when you're building decks and see what's all out there.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I mean, like I built for the most part that Kediss and Crom deck is built around because red has a bunch of those combat trick like giant growth kind of effects, which are mostly built for standard kind of draft environments, But I built a deck because I wanted to use those kind of things. Kind of the same thing here. I don't know if you can build a deck around these, but finding those draft chaff cards and making a deck where they just do really, really good is so much fun and feels so good.
Yeah, so, I mean, and even if it's not building the deck around them, if you can find a card that will slide into the deck you already have built, even better.
And just blow somebody out with some just garbage card from out of nowhere. Yes. It always feels great.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Hey, Chris, do you have a Grave Consequences laying around? I might need it for Sunday, March 7th.
I'm not sure if I have one of these.
When I'm facing off against 2 Rexiel decks, I might want this card.
Yeah.
it's I think it's like a 20-cent card too, so that's why I'm surprised for how good these for how good these 2 cards are as my examples. They're both like quarter cards.
Well, the last pick I have is another red one. So since Chris didn't pick red cards for his last selection, I've got a red one here. I got your back here, Chris.
Awesome.
It's from M21, so a recent core set. It's Unleash Fury for 1 and a red, and it just says double the power of target creature until end of turn.
Berserk.
At instant speed.
Berserk.
I mean, Berserk is a bonkers card. Yeah, it's only a single green, but 1 and a red is still super cheap.
And you don't have to sacrifice a creature.
You don't got to sacrifice a creature, right. Now, there are times the Berserk sacrificing creature is nice when, your opponent swings at somebody with a, 14/14 and you can double it and the creature dies, so it doesn't have to hit you next turn. That's kind of nice. But still, there's also times when you lose your own creature when you're going to try to one-shot somebody and you would rather not do it. If you happen to be playing red, this is a better Berserk almost in a lot of decks, but at the very least, if your deck is playing red and green and it's good enough for Berserk, Unleash Fury is crazy good.
Yep.
And I'm just always shocked it doesn't see more play considering how powerful it is.
Yep. Pull up the pen and paper and start the math of, so it doubles here and then it doubles from this enchantment and then it doubles from this enchantment.
Yeah, super, super good card. And it's one of those ones, too, you expect to see it in an old border from some old set. And you're like, they'd never print that now. They would, and then they did, and it doesn't too much play. So that is my last pick here for budget cards. Max, you did put an extra one down, so why don't you do your bonus card here for us?
My bonus card, because apparently I couldn't count yesterday when doing these notes. I have a Planeswalker, and that is Kiora Behemoth Beckoner. It's 2 in a hybrid Simic for a Kiora Planeswalker with loyalty of 7.
7 loyalty on a 3-mana Planeswalker.
And it has 1 activated ability for a -1 untapped target permanent, but I don't care about that. I care about her static ability. Whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This is in 6,500 decks, and it only costs 45 cents. This is what Simic likes to do. Play big creatures, ramp really fast, draw a bunch of cards. Play this card more, people. I'm advocating those Simic players to play this card more often.
Now, I can be devil's advocate on the price because there's like 5 versions of this card or something stupid out there.
Still counts.
I'm curious what the stained glass version's worth.
Yeah, and like, you drop this for 3 mana and spend and -1 down to 6, which is still a ton of loyalty, to untap that Soul Ring you used to cast it. And now you've functionally spent 1 mana to do this.
Yep.
And then you cast 2 or 3 creature spells and draw 3 cards that turn. So it winds up, like, there are plenty of situations and plenty of decks where this winds up being effectively an Ancestral Recall.
Right.
I mean, basically, 1 mana to draw 3 cards, and it's still there for next turn.
Yeah, that's because a lot of people aren't going to kill it. They're just going to look at it and be like, that's kind of annoying, but there's much worse things in those colors that I need to get rid of.
How many 4-powered creatures can you really play in a turn? It's only turn 5. Well, I'm also in Simic.
That's true.
And I also have the Garruk enchantment that's doing the same thing, and I have... this is
my Seedborn Muse is untapping stuff, and I can cast them at instant speed. And
no, I remember seeing that one from War of the Spark and just being like, what? 7 loyalty on a 3-mana Planeswalker? That's crazy.
And Chris, just so you know, this is the cheapest version of the card. The US promo, timestamp promo, is like $2.25. The stained glass one from the Secret Lairs is $6, and the timestamped foil Japanese alt art is $40.
Okay. Yeah, I figured the other ones people are putting their snagging up with everything, but still, 45 cents for the basic version, which actually a lot of, casual Commander players are going to be paying, as minimal as possible to build their decks. So This is perfect for them.
I mean, I was shocked when I did my Scryfall search for type Planeswalker less than or equal to $1. I had like 20 hits, and they weren't all these uncommon ones from War of the Spark. There was the Oath of Zendikar Chandra, just because she's been printed 5,000 times now, but there are a lot of very powerful Planeswalkers in EDH that fall under this $1 or less criteria.
Yeah.
Very nice, and it's very good for your wallet too if you're building a cheap deck. So there's some tips for everybody, some cool cards that you might be able to use if you're trying to build in a budget, or even if you're not. It's nice to just sometimes put some of these cool cards in decks and save yourself a few bucks. So hopefully some of that will be helpful to people out there. And if anyone has any suggestions for us for really fun sub-dollar or cheap cards they want to suggest, send them our way. We'd love to hear about it. Okay, well, we will be back next week. I am Dana. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSwishy1. Our show is lovingly edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find him at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. Until next week, I am Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.